Is it 2018 already? Postdoc, the New Orleans ACS meeting is coming up. I need data. Again. Yeah, I got a little bit of data to present, but I really need some new equipment. New equipment. Well, time to make it rain.
Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Woo! Nice. This is awesome. You have no excuses now.
Yeah. Yeah.
There we are.
Hello.
The right buttons. The right buttons help. So before we get started, I need everybody, someone, please. Is this working?
Can you hear us?
Last week,
Can you see us?
it came to my attention after the fact that we sounded like we were talking in a cave for the entire time. I think that it was I had the audio setting for this thing to like my laptop, even though like we can hear ourselves in our ears, like with this whole setup and the whole thing. Sounds a bit low, but not bad. I don't, let me just double check that I've got it right. Like
maybe you check on YouTube.
I think that this is the right input.
Yeah.
There's just micro.
You can also go to focus right and maybe increase.
Microphone. Should I do? Well, yeah. Is it?
Setup and the whole thing.
It sounds. Yeah, that sounds right.
Sounds a bit low, but not bad. I don't.
That sounds right. That does sound. I think that this is right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So if it's low, I'm guessing that Chris's volume is just too low in his computer.
Okay.
So that's your fault. I honestly think that last week I screwed up and I just stupidly forgot to check that the audio setting was the audio, these mics, right?
Yeah.
And not the laptops themselves. So anyway, sorry about that, to delay on minor garbage before we start here.
Oh yeah,
but I wanted to make sure that we were actually using the microphones in front of our faces,
Yeah, instead of recording the whole thing and we have the wrong audio and video settings.
Ridiculous. Yeah,
it's all good.
You'd think we'd have this down by now. It's been like forever, but still. Anyway.
Well, as always, welcome to another episode of Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry. I'm Dr. Alex Peroff. This is my colleague, Dr. Neil Spinner. And this is an opportunity for you guys to literally ask us anything about electrochemistry. We get lots of questions, email, YouTube comments, phone, webinars, the whole thing. And sometimes it's easy for us to answer the question like there, but some questions are a little complex. They require a little bit more time and effort to try to answer and really give it the depth that we know we can do with electrochemistry. We are using Restream as the platform to broadcast to YouTube. We've noticed there's maybe about like a 10-20 second delay between what you say in the chat and then what we actually see and what you hear. So just keep that in mind when typing your questions in. Also, if you're a tier 1 or tier 2 YouTube member, you should have access to join us on Restream. There should be a link in the community post that will let you come onto Restream, and then you can actually chat with us with your voice and not just type it out. And you'll have the opportunity to also share your screen, share your data with any questions. And we've done this a few times, so it's worked pretty well with a couple people, and we'd love to actually like hear you, chat with you. It's a lot of fun. We like it. This is a place where you can ask any question that you want. There are no dumb electrochemistry questions. The more detail you provide, the more clarity within the question really helps us with answering them. Sometimes just like, what is CV? It's like, well, there's a lot to that. So the more detail you can give us with your questions, the better we can answer them. And I would say lastly, forgive us in advance if we mispronounce your name when you ask a question in the chat. I know that you can literally type anything in. Most people put their names in, but sometimes we'll mispronounce them. So apologies in advance.
Do you want to talk about paper writing before we
We
sort of
can
I
do
see there's
that.
a few questions which we will definitely get to.
Yeah. So also another shout out before I forget. I was at the American Chemical Society in San Francisco actually earlier this week. And just a shout out for all the people who stopped by the Pine Research booth and said hello, especially Jesus from the University of California at UC Davis. And thank you for sharing the live stream. We're happy to help you and your students, and we just really appreciate you stopping by. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
But
I'm very sad I wasn't there because, you know, I know, listen, I know you all like me more, but I wasn't there. So Alex got all the love, and it's really sad for me. So I promise to be at the next meeting so you can ignore him and give me the love that I desperately want.
He really answers all the questions. EIS batteries, I'm just like, I'll sit this one.
But you're so much better on camera than me. So I can see why everybody likes you more. It's okay. It's fine. I've accepted it, despite what I just said.
It is all good. So we're taking in questions. One question, just kind of as we were waiting for the live stream to start, was from Kanav, who is in the process of writing a publication, a manuscript, his first publication. And
is it the first one?
Well, yeah. So he said,
where was the? Yeah, did you say it was the first one?
Indeed, it's my first paper, and I'm completely lost on how to write it. So
wait, where does that say? Did I miss it? I missed it.
It was well, I just posted it. So he said, yes, indeed, it's my first paper.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, I missed the comment there. Oh, yeah. Congratulations, Kanav. Actually, yeah. So I mean, anyway, I didn't realize it was. I was like, hey, we'll talk about Kanav's thing right when we start, just as a kickoff or whatever. I didn't realize it was your first paper, Kanav. Congratulations. And I mean, did you have? I have some advice I can give. Do you have some?
Oh yeah. We can both talk about advice, but it's always tough. I've heard a lot of interesting advice. I like to think of it. There's like a practical aspect of paper writing, and then there like the details about like what order you write things in, the story that you're trying to tell, just kind of like how to do science. My advisor in graduate school actually told me, when you're writing your paper, you want to start from the figures. You almost want to work backwards. You want to get the figures, and then, you know, what's your data, and then describe what it is. And then like, what do these results mean? That describes the story. What are the conclusions from those results? And then you write the beginning. So it's like, you almost work backwards. You don't start from the introduction, title, and abstract.
Yeah.
You start from the end. You start from like, okay, what is the data? What are the figures?
Actually, even before that, my advice for like the very first thing you should do when you are starting to write a paper, other than like, I don't know, double clicking Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
if you're using such a program, is to write the experimental section. Actually, that is the easiest and quickest section to write, because of all the things that you know about your paper, the one that you are, I mean, must be most sure of is what you did, right? Even before you look at the figures, try to talk about them, or even like summarize anything, you should be able to write your experimental section. And that, like, there's something about the process of writing a paper where I can say for myself, I guess, at the very least, having something down propels you to write more. Like, so if you just start and you open a blank Word document, you know, like this is, I mean, I'm not a writer, like, you know, like I've published, but I'm not like a writer, right? But I know that, you know, writer's block is a thing, of course, you know, so like it's the staring at a blank page can get you sort of just bananas. You're like, oh, what do I do? It's hard to know where to start. You know, you can like title your sections, but you have to start filling them in. So what, if you have an experiment, I promise, if you just like open up any of your favorite publications that you read, that you're using as reference for this one, that you know you're going to use it, and just look at their experimental section and loosely use it as a guide for the style. Like, you know, synthesis was performed by putting a thing in an oven and heating it until it blew up, and then, you know, whatever. But like, you can do, you should be able to do that pretty easily, right? You know, and it's not like it's going to be like right the first time, but, you know, was purchased from Sigma Aldrich, and all of my equipment was used from Pine Research because it's the only good company in the world, you know, so like the simple stuff. But anyway, once you get that down, you'll feel good about yourself. and that's, I mean that really literally. I'm not actually trying to be funny. You actually will feel really good about yourself. You'll have something down. You'll have like 2 or 3 paragraphs of actual content that like, hey, this is what I did, you know, whatever. It will probably help you feel better about filling in the next sections. And exactly what Alex said, you're working from the backwards to the front. Like you're getting your layout, like you're making an outline of figures. Like this, you're telling a story. You know, it's science, but you're still telling a story. You're still telling what I did, the order of the test. You know, I characterized it physically. This is the lattice structure I saw. Whatever. This is the particle size. This is why I think it would work in this thing. This is the results, and here's why it is good based on the results. And in conclusion, you should put it in your batteries or whatever. Okay, so that's, you're telling a story, and so that story is dictated by the order of the figures. So you're putting your figures in order, and then you fill in everything else, like you said. You know.
But would you also say, like, you may have all these data and all these figures, and you got that data in some chronological order, but that doesn't have to be the order that you write it in the paper. Like you should write it in a way that makes sense. It's like, even though I did something, no, the first thing I did was actually the last figure. It makes sense for the first thing you did to be the last figure within the context of the publication. So, and then the other thing, which is, I guess maybe a question to you, is like, you know, I'm from like a chemistry background, but Neil's from a chemical engineering. So I'm assuming like engineering based papers versus chemistry papers, like the end goal may be different.
They're what I would say to that is that there probably will tend to be something like a, I don't know, higher degree of empiricism, let's say, than, I don't know what you would call it, like first principles theory backed from engineering to chemistry proper. Like a chemistry paper is probably going to deal more with like strict chemistry theory, you know, whereas like I one of my papers when I was in graduate school, my advisor and I, we worked out this whole, like it was battery stuff. I'm not going to bore you forever, I promise. But like I'll make it like a 10-second version, is that like we did battery stuff. I was getting diffusional properties, and we worked out this whole like theoretical model of a sphere, and you know, a diffusion in and it changes and the whole thing. And we developed like our own empirical based on, you know, real math or first principles, but it's also just empirical. Like, well, okay, well, this is a way to predict the behavior based on, you know, stuff that's like empirical. You know, that's not really like, that's engineering. It's not really science. It's like you're basing an empirical relationship to predict something. It's useful, but it's not really scientific from like first principles. So that's more of an engineering mindset, right? And you know, Kanov just says that you know, did the experimental and abstract easily, so good. So you're already past that. The introduction was tough. The introduction's a pain because it's, you know, you're trying to. The introduction is where you're giving homage to everyone else. You're saying, okay, well, a bunch of people have done other stuff, and that is why I decided to do what I'm doing. And it puts my work into context. That's important, but it is also a bit of a pain. So I agree with that. But your results are making you run in circles. So again, the key with the results is think of it like a story. And I know that we sort of repeated ourselves here, but like, I think that you want to think about it as like if you already wrote the abstract, which the abstract is like the ultimate conclusion, you know, the conclusions or the summary or whatever you're, you know, calling the section, the summary of the conclusions is like an expanded version usually of the abstract. The abstract is like just the most pertinent information. Like, we made a thing. It showed these properties. This was the result of it. It is going to be good for this application. Like, that's an abstract. It's like the most distilled summary of everything that's in your paper, right? So you can even use your abstract. If your abstract is something like, we made a thing, we characterized it this way, we found its you know, its binding energy to be this, its surface area to be this, we put it in a flow cell. I think you're doing like vanadium flow batteries or something like that, right? And we got these results. That's the story, right? So try to arrange your figures that work in the same order as your abstract summary, something like that. Describing my results is making me either not add enough data or too much data. Always add too much data. Always. You can take it out later. It's harder to add afterwards. Add all the data you want. Later, either in the iterative process, if you have an advisor or boss, or you're just doing this on your own, or whatever it is, they will either iterate and edit, tell you to take it out, and you can throw it into supplemental.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Always add too much. Put everything in, even if you think it's meaningless or unnecessary. Add every figure, every piece of information in your summary. And then later on, when you're reading it thoroughly, once you've finished, exactly, Chris says, throw it into an appendix. Yeah, you might end up saying like, well, actually, this extra XRD plot is like extraneous, so you can create a appendix or a supplemental. A lot of times papers come with the supplemental, whatever. Supplemental data.
The SI, just like
and it's literally the journals publish these on the website. It's like oftentimes they're even free. Like you often have to have an academic whatever to get the paper, but the supplemental you can get. And it's like it doesn't even have to be like a paper. Like the supplemental is honestly often just like figures and no writing. Or sometimes it's a little bit of writing, like this is my supplemental section, here's a figure. It's like, and then you can refer to it in your paper. You can just say like, as shown in figure S2,
from
and then
supplement.
see supplemental whatever, and you don't have to provide any other context. It's up to the reader if they wish to go to the supplemental and look at it. So that's I guess that's about much like I could say regarding that.
And that's how you write a scientific paper. Of course, coming up like from the chemistry perspective, the challenge is always like you have all this data and we have to come up with a like what's the chemical mechanism? Like, have we demonstrated like CH activation? Like, is the bond length, that's always like one of the chemistry paper. It's like, you have all these cool results, but what does it mean scientifically? Which,
and then my last bit of advice that I would tell you is a bit of a gaming the system thing to some extent. It's from experience. I can tell you, once you've finished your paper, you're going to submit it to whatever journal, and they're going to come back. And there is a 0% chance they're going to say, this is a great paper, we're going to publish it. That will not happen. Most likely, if you've done a good job and your data is solid or whatever, they will say, we will accept this with some revisions. Right. I mean, they might just reject it. Depends on like how high an impact factor journal you go to. If you go for like Nature or Science and they're like, well, this isn't impactful enough for that degree of journal, you'll have to, go to a slightly lower impact factor journal. But generally speaking, once you get the conditional approval with revisions, you're going to have reviewers to respond to. You're going to have to write a document or an email, but usually it's in part of a Word document where you respond to each of the reviewers' comments. You start each of those responses with, this is a great comment by the reviewer. And then it's respectfully, you're full of crap and I'm not doing that. But every response, you kiss their butt. This is my honest to God advice to you. Your response to the reviewers, because it'll be like reviewer 1 and there's like, 1, 2, 3. They'll say like, this paper shows something. Here are my comments. And they'll be like, why didn't you talk about whatever? And because they're bringing their biases to the review. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's reasonable. And then you'll add one sentence in your introduction that says like, and other people did this thing with a reference and it makes them happy. And you say like, great comment by the reviewer. This is a well thought out addition. And we have added a sentence here saying something. And then sometimes they want you to like, actually what you should have done was you should have done, an extra 700,000 hours worth of impedance tests on this one thing in this one condition. And so you have, if you might read that and say, there's no way I'm doing that. Partially because my setup is dismantled over there and I don't want to set it all up again. It's going to take me forever. And I don't think it's necessary. It's not going to add any content to it. So your response to the reviewer is, this is a great suggestion by the reviewer. Thank you very much. We are likely to explore this in a future publication. I have added a sentence in my manuscript to acknowledge that this would be a very valuable contribution in a future work. That's how you respond. You don't say buzz off, I'm not doing it. So you have to have the brownest nose.
As Chris says.
As Chris says, that's right. So that's my honest to gosh advice. I did that for every one of my publications and it worked like a charm.
That's right. I think that's it. That's how you write it. That's how you write a manuscript.
Yes. That's the peer reviewed.
That's the peer review process.
Exactly.
Oh God.
We got to scroll way up here.
There are
some questions.
There is. Let's see. I the first one I see is Doa.
Welcome back. I think we saw you last week.
Welcome back, and also thank you or welcome. I saw some new people. Osama.
Yeah, I emailed with
Marie.
yeah. That's thank
Memory.
you for joining us,
Yeah, thank you
Osama,
for
and for
joining.
becoming a
Hi.
member. I think I emailed with you. You sent me some data on like light and dark spectra. Something I sent you back some analysis. So nice to meet you, and thank you for joining us. Yeah.
So Doa is asking, first off, thank you for these live sessions. It's great. What happened to the recognition? I think that's supposed to be recognition.
I think so. Yeah.
Present on working electrode and analyte after one cycle of CV in terms of electron transfer. What happened to the recognition element? So Doa, let's extra
Recognition. I don't know exactly what
after one cycle of the
in terms of
CV.
electron transfer. Well, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to know exactly what you're asking. Element recognition element present.
After one.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. I mean, if you're asking about like what happens with electron transfer, like, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, this seems like way too simple of an answer. Your question probably is more complicated than that. But I mean, you know, if you're performing a Faradic reaction, there's an electron transfer either to or away from the working electrode, right? If it's a reduction, it's gaining electrons and not. I don't think that's exactly what you mean. That seems too simplistic.
It is interesting to think about.
He has
there's a follow-up.
Yeah, I don't know if it's related to that or it's a different thing, but
Okay.
a little further down,
Let's see.
Dua asked this. How many times? I guess we should just answer this because I don't 100% know what you're referring to. So apologies there, but this is Dua's next question. So how many times can you use target analyte solution? For example, if we run one cycle of maybe this is a follow-up, I guess. We obtain redox peaks. Do we need to change the solution because analyte is oxidized? No, almost for sure no.
Yeah.
So you can actually do this mathematics. Essentially, if you have, let's just say you have like a typical like 50 to 100 milliliters of solution, right? And it has some analyte in it, and you've reduced it or oxidized it, and you get like, all these are rough estimates, but it's like typical, let's just say. So 50 to 100 milliliters of solution, you have a smallish electrode disc or something, right? And you get like however many microamps of current.
Yeah.
Even a milliamp or whatever.
Yeah.
If you do the math, like Faraday's law of electrolysis, like NFC, whatever, all the constants. I'm stupid and not saying the right things, but whatever. You could just figure out how many moles of stuff you reduced or oxidized. It's like nanomolar at highest.
Yeah, probably lower.
You would have to do that until you're 900 years old before you like appreciably change the analyte concentration, and especially from 1 CV, almost for sure, unless your electrode is massive or something, right? Like you're not changing the bulk concentration, almost for sure.
Yeah. It's so if you are using just like a flat disc electrode that's like 5 millimeters at a diameter, used for analytical electrochemistry experiments, you're at most generating just surface charge, right? Just only the molecules near the surface are getting electrolyzed. Everything else in the bulk is like they're still there.
It's unchanged.
It's basically unchanged. So you can, and that's just from one cycle. So you can do multiple cycles without a problem. A couple things to keep in mind as you're doing experiments, depending on your system, is you could get, quote, electrode fouling, where something irreversibly sticks to the surface.
That's true.
That can happen where all of a sudden your one cycle or multiple cycles don't look the same. That's not necessarily because you're oxidizing all of your species. It's just because something's sticking to your surface. You almost have a higher likelihood of something irreversibly sticking to your surface and fouling the electrode than you are of oxidizing everything, unless you have a large bulk electrolysis cell with a huge foam electrode with a high surface area and you're stirring the solution. But this is just for cyclic voltammetry. So hopefully this provides you with a little bit of some kind of answer. And I'm thinking back to your kind of your first question about recognition, and maybe it's helpful to mention to everybody that charge, electron transfer, whatever a potentiostat can measure is what it's kind of like what it measures, sort of say. So all of everything we know about electrochemistry is just because the potentiostat is able to measure that signal. Like we can talk about electrical double layer because a potentiostat measured the charge, the non-Faradaic, charging of the electrical double layer. We've measured charge, Faradaic charge transfer because the electron transfer was measured by the potentiostat. So what the potentiostat can recognize is ultimately like what you can use in your scientific research and stuff. So I don't know if that was also part of your question about like CV recognition. It has to be a charge related thing, either electron transfer or even just the movement of ions can be picked up by a potentiostat. So hopefully that's helpful.
So I was just checking as well. So Fernando has a question, but there's a bit of follow-up. So
yeah,
I'm going to try to read through a few in a row before we start answering one and then not get the context, because it looks like he had. So your first question was, why do nanoparticles get activated after an AD? So that's accelerated degradation test, I think.
Okay.
ADT. For example, some perovskites have low catalytic activity for hydrogen evolution reaction, but after the accelerated degradation test, the catalytic and electrochemically active surface area increase a little bit. And then there was some follow-up here. So I see a little lower. Fernando clarified a little bit, saying the project goes like this. Perovskites I've synthesized have a particle size between 180 to 400 nanometers. It's actually pretty large, but I guess they are perovskites, so it's maybe not too unusual. I tried to attach them to Vulcan's a kind of carbon, and a small amount of platinum. And then you have here that the thing I believe is that the particle size is affecting the catalytic activity. Well, that's absolutely true. I'm working with lanthanum cobalt oxide doped with various amounts of strontium. Okay, so there's a lot here, and so first of all, absolutely, particle size will affect catalytic activity. Right. Generally speaking, so I have some experience with perovskites, power chlors, some of these kinds of mixed transition metal oxide sorts of materials. Perovskites it's AbO3 or AbO5. So I guess AbO3 because you have lanthanide cobalt O3. So generally speaking, nanoparticles are ideally, I guess, tens ish of nanometers. So if you have hundreds, that might be making some impact because 400 nanometers is kind of large. You're getting close to like mesopore size, I think. I don't know exactly where the designation is, something like micron, microparticle, nanoparticles to mesoparticles. There's some, I don't know 100% the exact designation, but as you get larger particles, you have lower specific surface area, right? That's why nanoparticles are so attractive, like really smaller particles, because you can get, it's like the physics thing, like every particle is a sphere, right? Right. So every model, every model you'll see, right? Not every, but a lot of models simplify everything. The joke with physics is that what is it?
The horse race.
Yeah. It's if the horse, you're modeling a horse race, it's like the horse is a sphere and it's running on a frictionless surface.
It's like you go to a horse. It's like the joke is you go to a horse race and there's like a physicist who's like making a bet, and it's just like, which one do you think's gonna win? Oh, I think it's gonna be like horse A. It's like, well, why do you think that? And then he models. It's like, well, if you model the horse as a perfect sphere on a frictionless surface, he's doing all this math. But
it's like, because that's accurate, right?
That's accurate.
Yeah. So that's like the physics. That's also kind of an engineering approach, because a lot of times you model stuff because you do like TEM or SEM on your particles, and there's a lot of distribution of size. Sometimes they're like oblong shaped or whatever, but generally if you're doing some model, you just say like, well, the average particle size is 100 nanometers. Okay, well, if I just assume they're spheres and you have them, next to each other around, it's what have you, right? Right. The smaller they are, the more like available space around each one there is, the more overall surface area there is. So that's going to if it is highly electrocatalytically active, you're going to, in theory, get better reactivity, better results, I should say. The other thing that I would say is that I don't know what the conductivity of lanthanum cobalt oxide is doped with strontium, but I assume you're using Vulcan carbon because it improves the conductivity, which is fine. What I don't understand is why you're using a small amount of platinum, because in two ways, that could be tricky, because the platinum is obviously quite adept electrocatalytically, right? And so you have to find a way, if you're adding a small amount of carbon, to dissociate and differentiate your electrocatalytic activity of your perovskite from the platinum, because platinum might be, platinum's not a great HER catalyst, but it will do HER. Right. If you go low enough potential, it will participate. So, you can get away with it maybe because the onset potential for your material might be greatly improved. And so maybe the platinum is somewhat negligible, but it's not going to do nothing. Eventually you'll have some, platinum hydrogen adsorption and HER going on. And it's, so that can be problematic. The other thing is that, I don't know exactly what your accelerated degradation test consists of, but it's interesting because the catalytic activity increases. You've talked about activation before, right? Like usually with carbon, you're doing to an extreme potential. You've talked more about, I don't actually know well enough, like what is physically happening to the carbon, for example, when you activate it.
My guess is that there are things that are just on, like you have this thing in air, and they're like volatile organics, surface hydroxide groups, carboxylic acid. There's all this stuff on the carbon that's just there in a random dispersion. So when you put it in a solution of dilute sulfuric acid and you cycle it back and forth, we say that they activate it, and that kind of gets rid of it, oxidizes,
divesting the surface stuff.
And you kind of have these kind of cleaner surfaces. I mean, even like people talk about like activated carbon, and it's literally just carbon that they heated up a lot to get rid of stuff.
That's like in your filters in your refrigerator. Or your water filter.
Yeah, your water filters.
Carbon,
So that's my kind of limited understanding, because really the way those types of systems work is some molecule flows through it and just gets stuck to it. And now it's like it's stuck. It's found an active site, and that carbon's able to, quote, capture, in the case of a filter, it's able to capture more stuff than if it wasn't activated. So similarly, if you're, you may get additional catalytic activity because more sites are available.
Right.
That's kind of the idea.
That's probably what's happening, right? And so your ECSA, or your activity, your current perhaps, is increasing in the immediate. What you might have over time, however, as you do more testing, is a decrease progressively in your ECSA or your current or your output because of things like agglomeration. So as you do, this happens with platinum, for example. It's a well-known phenomenon called Oswald ripening, where the platinum particles will eventually meld together and make larger amalgamations of, it's the wrong word, but groups of clusters of themselves. And so the surface area, there's all this surface area around these two balls. And then when they come together, you've lost that surface area. So that can happen. And, in particular, if your perovskites are relatively large, as they glom together or agglomerate, right, as time goes on, can happen. They can lose some conductivity, lose some surface area. If for example their conductivity is intrinsically not great, as they start to agglomerate, you might lose like access of carbon to various active sites, and so you will lose the ability to get electrons to there. And that might reduce your ECSA over time. So
we need to know more about what exactly the ADT is.
But right? In essence, I guess that kind of covers, hopefully, to a decent amount, kind of what's going on with your system. And if you have more to follow up, please feel free to do so. But I guess that's a decent overview of sort of activation and ECSA, agglomeration, those kinds of things.
Let's
I
see.
think next is Kanab. Right?
Yeah, it looks like he has a.
Has a weird question.
Yeah, let's see. I have a weird question that might just be wrong. Well, let's see.
Well, it's definitely not wrong. You know,
Instead of running CV in an oxidizer, I run it in a reducing agent like oxalic acid. Will it help in higher reduction potentials?
I got to think about this.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this too.
Instead of running CV in an oxidizer, do you mean like an oxidizing environment or like in an
Reducing
an
agent.
oxidizer? I run it in a reducing agent like oxalic acid. I don't know what system is this. This is your system. You know a little bit about it. So I don't know. He's using vanadium something, I guess. Is that?
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
don't know what
when
system you're
Kanavan
talking
talked with me, he was mostly just he was oxidizing some like graphene related things to create graphene oxide layers and growing them.
Okay.
I think it was in a. I think I want to say it was in an acidic solution, but I can't remember for sure.
Instead of running in an oxidizer, I guess like an oxidizing solution, you're running it in a reducing agent like oxalic acid.
Yeah. So keep. Will it help in higher reduction potentials? So something to keep. So just in general, here's a thing to kind of keep in mind is that an oxidizing and a reducing agent you can think of as they have a reduction in oxidation potential associated with them. That potential will, if it's an oxidizing agent, it'll it has a potential to oxidize a thing. If it's a reducing agent, it has an associated potential to reduce a thing. I can actually, let me share my screen because I haven't shared my screen in a while, but hopefully I can see it. But is
gotta maximize it. Here you go.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
So one thing to kind of keep in mind, and I keep talking to what's his name, Dan Shearson about like about like electron transfer. Let's talk about electron transfer. Like these pictures like this, where like this is the electrode surface, this is the potential, like the energy, sort of say, and then we have like, oh, there's a species here, and then we reduce it. This is like molecular orbitals or something like that. So that's like molecular orbitals, and this is the highest occupied. No, so this needs to be the LUMO, the lowest unoccupied for a reduction.
Right.
And so you have stuff like this, and that's what we do with an electrode. So this is an electrode. Oh God, what is
Not
with
enough.
this E? Oh my God. What is?
I thought I was the one who was bad at art.
I know. I am.
You can't be worse than me.
I am very.
We're getting backwards on who's terrible at drawing. This isn't okay.
So, electrode, and we're just gonna put road down here. So electrode. So electrode does this, but you could totally do this with like a molecule, right? So you can have like a molecule, or something like that. Some molecule that also does this process. So like this is like reducing agent, right? We're like reducing agent.
That's a good G.
My hand slips. I'm making writing very hard. But like reducing agent, like chemically, right? This is all electron transfer. Now one thing that Dan Shearson will get very angry with me at, and I hopefully will I will teach you the correct drawing to this. But basically, yeah, you need the reduce. Like if it's going to be a reducing agent, it needs to have a sufficiently negative potential that it easily can push an electron into the LUMO of the molecule. But the thing that's interesting is that this kind of arrow stuff doesn't actually happen. So this,
it's all a lie.
It's all a lie.
All of our theory is a lie.
All of our theory is a lie. What really happens is the energy level of the LUMO and the reducing agent need to be the same for electron transfer to occur. This is the truth. There's a quantum mechanics. Like electrons don't just hop from lower to higher energy levels and back and forth. They move like side to side. So this LUMO really needs to be like here for the electron transfer to occur, or close to. And and what ultimately happens is, instead of it being like these discrete levels, you actually have these bands of donor and acceptor states. Right? So you actually have like these bands of donor and acceptor states. And if I pick another color, just do like another one here. So they have these bands of donor and acceptor states, and these donor and acceptor can go up and down, right? So sometimes the potential of whatever the thing is can go up and down, and it's only when there's overlap between them that you're going to get electron transfer to occur. So when you have one, a donor state here, and you have like an acceptor state that's like here, only in this region are you going to get a little bit of electron transfer to occur. So your reducing agent and your oxidizing agent needs to have some bit of overlap between the LUMO of the molecule that you're going to reduce, and similarly, conversely, with the oxidizing agent, there needs to be, just shift this guy like down here. There has to be a little bit of overlap here at least to get that electron transfer to occur. Now, granted, if they're overlapped a lot, like in this case, you're going to get a lot of electron transfer to occur because there's many more of the states are occupied. So this is the Dan Shearson correct description of electron transfer, and hopefully that helps you understand that when you have oxidizing and reducing agents, what they're actually doing, like in an electrochemical context, with transferring electrons to the species of interest. So hopefully, Kanav, that kind of helped you a little bit, like maybe understand a little bit more about what's happening when you have an oxidizing and reducing agent, and you also maybe shift the potential as well. Maybe that helps.
He also cleared up. He said,
okay.
He added, there was some chatter with Kanav and Chris a little bit while you were giving the explanation.
The question.
I'm just putting it up here. He put the reaction like carbon oxidizing to graphene oxide,
yes,
and then reducing to graphene. So if I oxidize the electrode outside the CV process, so like with an oxidizing agent or something, and then use oxalic acid to reduce the graphene oxide.
Yeah. So that can work thermodynamically. That can work.
The interesting thing, I guess I would say to this, is that this whole kind of process you're talking about is sort of, funnily enough, I don't know, like not part of electrochemistry. Like you're talking about oxidizing and reducing agents to make these changes, whatever, to your catalyst, which is perfectly fine. It's sort of outside of the scope of electrochemistry.
Well, it's another,
right, like
it's another form of electrochemistry.
But it's not like with the potentiostat is what I mean.
It's not with the potentiostat.
Like if you're relying on a chemical process to an oxidizer or a reducer, whatever, right, chemically to transform your electrode, like great, right? But in some ways, it's like, I guess I don't know if this is in line with exactly what you're doing and what you're thinking, but like what I would say to this in some manner of thinking through the experiment is like, if your thought process is like, I have to do an oxidation and then a reduction. Well, what I'm going to do is set up my electrochemistry experiment with my graphene, graphite, carbon, whatever catalyst, and I'm going to add an oxidizing agent to make the oxidation happen. And then I'm going to apply a negative potential to do the reduction. You just got to be careful because there's nothing intrinsically that makes like your catalyst like go in that order. Like if you're applying a reducing potential, the potentiostat is controlling the energy, the driving force. So it isn't guaranteed that like, well, the chemistry thing that's there, the oxalic acid or whatever, is going to like oxidize it first. And then my potentiostat's only going to reduce the thing I want. Like it might just cause both of those to be a reducing process. Cause like you're setting the energy of your electrode to be reducing. It isn't like it's guaranteed to have a reduction just because you have an it isn't like you're guaranteed to have an oxidation occur just because you have an oxidizing agent present. Maybe it does, but I don't know. Like this subsequent thing sounds like it would be a 2-batch process. Like I don't know, oxidize it over here and then take your oxidized product into a different vessel and then do your reduction somewhere else. Like you're sort of trying to have 2 competing like subsequent reactions occur in the same pot, and I don't know if it's going to work.
It's going to be, so I think the chemistry, I'm of the opinion that the chemistry is going to dominate. Like because to a degree, when you control the potential of the working electrode, it's just in that little area that the potential is going to be controlled. Like in the bulk, like your oxidizing agent is going to oxidize your species, and that's it. That's going to happen. That actually, again, another like Dan Shearson kind of just like the Nernst equation of what you put into your solution governs. Like if I just put a platinum wire into a solution not connected to any potentiostat, the potential, the Fermi level of that metal is governed by the redox potential and governed by the Nernst equation. But to your point, what's going to be complicated is like, okay, you do one process with your chemical oxidizing agent, but who's to say that when you use the potentiostat to reduce it, you're not just going to reduce the oxidizing agent?
That's part of my point, is like, or at least my thought process maybe wasn't articulated properly, but like you're putting a reducing potential.
Yeah.
You're going to have any reduction that's possible occur.
Yeah.
You know, it won't just necessarily be the one that you want, which is why one of the last comments that Kanav said is, you know, I have to check the reducing agent based on the electrode material with respect to energy levels, like checking the potentials that you are doing. What are they going to drive?
Yeah.
It's not going to just like drive the one thing you want. It's going to drive whatever is energetically favored at that potential.
Yeah. Exactly.
So anyway, I guess, and on a relatively surface level, I hope that's a decent answer to that inquiry. I think the next thing was this little comment here.
I'm like scrolling up trying to.
This was it says guard of viewer says thanks for the article writing tips. So we talked about that at the very beginning. If you missed it, do you have any general tips for how I have a Viva in them? I don't know what Viva is. Is that must be a term from a different country? But I'm assuming this means you have a. You're defending your thesis.
Oh, okay.
I haven't seen that term before.
Maybe
that's not an American thing. We're both from the U.S., so that was not. Anyway, do you have any general tips for how I should predict questions from my thesis? My general advice is anything during your thesis present. It's usually like you have your thesis as a document, right? It's a long paper. A lot of times, if you have publications, it's just like a amalgamation of your publications with some connecting stuff and introduction, whatever. But the presentation is a similar phenomenon to writing a paper, except it's more all encompassing because it's like all of your data, but you're trying to tell a story, right? You still are fundamentally like trying to tell a story of which is a daunting task, admittedly, but a story of your research, your entire graduate school research. So first of all, it's telling a story will likely garner questions related to that story. If you're sort of all over the place and just throwing a bunch of data in, someone might do this anyway, but they're likely to ask a question if you're just throwing a whole bunch of random disjointed data at them, because like I was here for 5 years and I got all this data. They might be like, well, what about whatever? So try to keep it coherent and cogent. And the other thing is that the way you want to think is anything, and I mean anything, that you show in your slides during your thesis defense is fair game for a question. Anything. Like, what is that one data point on that plot on slide 32? What is that data point? Where did that come from? Or like, why did that happen? So be judicious about what you show. This is not necessarily the case in the thesis defense or a publication, because you can kind of, like I was talking about before, you can throw a bunch of figures in, maybe kick them to supplemental, whatever, but be judicious and careful about what you show in your PhD presentation. We did this when I was in graduate school, like my group, like we would go through every slide, and it was like you would ask the most specific questions, like what does that mean when you wrote that word on that slide? So things in slides, for example, in your thesis defense, if you're going to start a slide with the sentence, I know you can't read this, but you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
If you're putting a bunch of tiny text to prove a point, it's not proving the point you think it is. If you can't read it, why is it there?
Yeah.
You should do most of the talking and don't read your slides. So the fewer words you put, the better. If you can talk through a plot, that's better, because then people aren't reading the slides when they should be listening to you. And you should know your data. So hopefully you're showing a plot, you know what you did to collect it, you know what it means. This doesn't mean you don't show anything because you're afraid of getting a question. It just means that be careful and intentional about what you show, and don't feel like you have to show absolutely everything. For one, you don't have 10 hours to present. It's probably 30 minutes or 40 minutes or something, right? So, but be prepared and think through everything on every slide about what kind of questions you could get based on what's shown there. Now, to a certain extent, the answer is you can't predict every question you're going to get.
Yeah.
And it happens. It's okay. And then I guess my last advice, and then if you have any advice, is be perfectly honest. I got a question. I still remember to this day, like it's just, you remember these things because it was yourself. I got a question in my defense that I could not answer. I honestly I did not know the answer. It was like, it was almost like in retrospect.
What was the question?
So
I'm just curious.
I actually, in retrospect, I feel like that's not a fair question.
Oh yeah.
Like, okay, so it's very simple actually. Like I did a bunch of stuff with nickel. I had a lot of nickel oxide, characterization, use in batteries, use in other kinds of stuff. And someone basically asked me like, why didn't you use something else? Or like, what would be the benefit of using something like manganese compared to nickel?
Yeah.
And I was like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like manganese, like I don't know. I just looked at nickel. That's what I did. Like, there's like other reasons that are interesting. Like the group that I went into was working on this project, and I went into graduate school and joined the group, and they were looking at nickel oxide and other sorts of things. And I sort of settled into nickel as a, and it you know how it goes. You're sort of looking, and then you try different synthesis procedures, and you look into these other things. But it's like I just sort of got into this project, and that was the material that we were, because the answer for why nickel is because it's a relatively inexpensive material compared to platinum or whatever, and it theoretically has a lot of possible uses as a nickel oxide as a semiconductor for alkaline processes and for batteries. And so I investigated those, and it's like, well, I didn't look at every single transition metal in my scant 4 years in graduate school. And I don't know off the top of my head the market price of nickel compared to manganese or cobalt.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be one answer in some sense. If I were like, well, nickel is $8 a pound and manganese is $4 billion a pound. So I chose nickel because it's cheap. Like, I don't know, so I didn't know the answer. Yeah. And so my answer was, I don't know. I'm very sorry. So my point is it feels embarrassing, and it is. It's frustrating to like feel like you don't have an answer, especially during your big show.
Yeah.
But just be honest, because you will do yourself a great disservice if you try to lie or filibuster through it. Just be honest. If you don't know the answer to something, that is an acceptable answer in science. Is I don't know the answer to that. That would require I would be happy to look into that and get back to you or something like that. You can give an answer like that. That's okay.
Yeah. I agree with Neil on all things. One thing that's I would say is very important is just as Neil said, have other people look at it. Like do practice presentations with your group. I actually know a person who this was not for like the thesis defense. This was for the writing component of what we call the qualifying exam or the QM, and maybe the Viva is like that. It's like preparation for. Yeah, the person clarified. Oh, I just checked too. So the Viva is the European term for defense. Oh, European for defense. So, okay. That's okay. So he's passed the qualifying exam. I haven't heard of that term before. So okay. But like someone didn't read their what they wrote, and this may be the same thing with the thesis. Like you might be trying to like smash out like 150 to 200 pages. Definitely have someone like read it, because one person actually did not pass, they had to do it over again because it wasn't written very well. And if somebody read it, they would have been able to do it. But similarly, give practice presentations ahead of time and have your lab mates absolutely grill you, especially your lab mates, because they're going to get you to think about things that you haven't thought about. And just by virtue of having thought about it, like if one of your lab mates asked you the question like why nickel, then you would at least have thought about like the question, and then when it comes time to the defense, it's just like, oh well, we use nickel because of this, and maybe it's not the most complete absolute thing, but like you have like some reason, some answer for it. And then I have always kind of balanced between a level of absolute fundamental knowledge about like electrochemistry. Like for me, there were things where it's like, oh, I need to understand how a potentiostat works and how fundamental electron transfer works. But really, you also need to be like practical with your like the science. Like I mix this, I mix that. There's contamination here. This is how we fix it. Be very familiar with the literature related to your field as well. You're going to very easily be able to say like the reason we did this is because some other, like when you can reference somebody else as having done something, it kind of, I don't know, it validates.
It's a big strength. And yeah, why did you pick this thing? Well, in the literature, people have shown that there's an improved activity when they did this synthesis step. So we thought that would help our results, and it did seem to.
Yeah.
That's that's like almost nobody has a response to that, because that's like, you did your research, you did your work.
Yeah. You're familiar with the literature.
It wasn't like I picked a name out of a hat and it said cook it for 10 hours. You know? Like you have reason behind your
behind
method,
your thing.
Exactly.
And I don't know. Sometimes like honestly, whoever's like on your committee and stuff, like if you name drop like some famous other chemist did this, they're just gonna be like, oh, so and so did it. Yeah, it's probably good.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point.
In a way.
Name drop for your references.
Super
like, well, I had a beer with this guy once, and he was telling me.
Yeah,
that's a bit much. I'm just kidding.
All right.
Let's see. What do we got
the next
next?
question? And let us know, because we're trying to scroll up through the chat to find questions, but also if we for some reason accidentally skipped you, like write something at the bottom too, in case like we haven't gone.
This is an important one. So Masi says you're the best.
It's talking about you.
They mean me.
It's talking about you.
Talking about me. That's
right.
You're
Right. The cool guy.
Maybe it's you. Everyone thinks you're the famous one. You're the one on our YouTube videos. So you're the most famous.
Well, you're on the YouTube videos too. So
a couple. Let's see. What do we got here, Chris? So Osama, yeah, I see. I hope it helps. The most appropriate circuit model should be. I'm not sure if this is in reference to. I had emailed with you previously, so I hope that the results that I shared with you were helpful. I had looked at some data. So yeah, let's see. I think we're Dua's comment here. Can you explain faradic current and capacitive current, difference between them, and if there's already a video? Do you talk about that at CV or?
I do.
Okay.
I actually do talk about it in the introduction to cyclic voltammetry.
Yeah.
So we can talk about it some more.
Yeah. So yeah, the first comment is to go to our YouTube channel and find. I think it's the most watched video on our channel is Alex's. What is
introduction to cyclic voltammetry? Talks a little bit about it. Exactly. I can find it, but I can at least tell you. I can tell you very simply. So, do you mind finding the link to the intro to CV? And then we'll just post that in the chat.
Yeah.
But then Faradaic current. The interesting thing is, I think it's actually relatively simple in the sense that non-Faradaic current is current associated with the movement of ions, but no electron transfer. And Faradaic current is associated with electron transfer. So when a molecule goes from the iron +3 oxidation state to the iron +2 oxidation state, that is a Faradaic reduction reaction. And vice versa. If it goes from +2 to +3, the electron had to move from the molecule to the metal or conductive working electrode. That is always a Faradaic process. Always a Faradaic process. And everything else is what we describe as non-faradic, but the majority of it is what we call capacitive current because it has to do with what we would describe as charging. So in that situation of the capacitive current, you really have like a layer of ions on one side of your like working electrode, and then you have a layer of ions on the other side, and they orient themselves. And there is a current associated with the movement of these ions, but these ions don't actually transfer electrons between each other. It's It's kind of interesting. Like if you think about a salt like potassium chloride, and you apply a positive bias and you have these chloride ions right next to the surface, the chloride doesn't get neutralized, right? It's Cl minus at the surface, and it doesn't become chlorine gas at that. Of course, if you go to sufficiently positive potential, you can generate chlorine gas, but it's just charge and there's no electron transfer. The oxidation state of that molecule does not change. So that's, I think, the best way. And Neil put a link to the CV video that describes that a little bit more. But Noah, hopefully that answers your question. Please let us know if you need further clarification.
Just a logistics note. Doa also asked, is there any live session next Friday? Yeah, we should be here.
Yeah, we should be here next Friday.
Should be fine.
Yeah. Not traveling to somewhere.
Next Friday, that is the 25th of August. After that, I will be likely not here for 2 straight weeks. I will be traveling.
Why?
I might be able to join you. I'll have to see the timing.
Okay. Yeah.
On the 1st, I might literally be in the sky.
Okay.
On the 8th, I might be able to join you. I will be many hours ahead of you, but at this time it will be the evening. So I probably can. Mm-hmm. I'll try to figure it out. It depends where I am. If I have internet, I'll have to figure all that kind of stuff out. So, but we don't have any weeks, as far as I'm aware, coming up where neither of us are here. So, so we should be going every week for this, as far as I'm aware.
If we can.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Masi, other than telling us that we're the best, now we have to answer the question because you've buttered us up.
Yeah.
What should we do about the bubbles produced on the electrode surface during tests? What is the best approach to get rid of them? It's a good question. Yeah. There's a few things you can try. Some of it depends on the setup and the electrochemistry, the physical stuff that you're doing. So if you're doing rotating electrodes, you can rotate the electrode. Sometimes that helps dislodge stuff. Another thing that you can do is, so if you have if you have a vessel and your electrodes are usually pointed straight down, if at all possible, it's not always possible, I understand, right? It depends on how well you can engineer your setup or what you can clip to or what the ports look like or whatever. If you're able to get your electrode at an angle, then the bubbles that form are more likely to leave because there's escape or whatever. Sometimes the problem is that your electrode's straight down and the electrodes get caught dead center or whatever, and they can't escape left or right. So if you're able to tilt your electrode in some manner in the solution at even several degrees, what have you, you might be able to alleviate some of those bubbles. Otherwise, if you're doing something like oxygen evolution or hydrogen evolution, sort of comes with the territory. You're revolving a gas on purpose, you might get bubbles, right? Otherwise, it's maybe your potential's too high or low. You might be over oxidizing or over reducing something to produce the bubbles in the first place, and that's less than ideal, right? So you might want to try to adjust your set point to get them out. But otherwise, if you're consistently getting bubbles, right, it's tricky because
it's a reaction.
Yeah, if it's a reaction that's producing a lot of gas, other than trying to move the solution, right? And I talked about rotating the electrode. You can try it if you have a stir plate, right? You could add a stir bar to kind of move the solution around. That might help flee the bubbles from your electrode. But if they're being produced at the working electrode, actively, you might not have a choice. You might end up having some interruptions in your signal necessarily, because as a bubble is formed at the electrode where it's being generated, it's going to be there for some amount of time before it can hopefully be dislodged or something. Yeah. You might end up with some spikes in your data that you just have to either correct afterwards or, I don't know, treat as outliers. So it's tricky. I mean, that's definitely one of those uh, common hazards of electrochemistry is that you have gas often involved, right? Whether you're
Yeah.
purging or you're producing it, it's a necessary thing that's present sometimes, and it's it's
Mhm.
not helpful because electrochemistry, most aqueous or non-aqueous liquid phase electrochemistry requires the electrolyte electrode interface to be
Yeah.
consistent, and bubbles mess that up.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's a few tips for you. You can, if you're
Yeah.
able to try any of those, it might help.
Yeah. Hopefully that was good.
Yeah.
Suhas has a question. Can electrolyte concentration affect the shape of the CV curve? And actually, Kanav just answered the question below, which is yes.
Yes.
It certainly can.
Yeah.
In several, actually, what I'm finding to be several ways. So one, if the concentration of the electrolyte is too low, you're going to have a lot of resistance, and that's going to create peak separation,
Mm.
kind of an IR compensation type of thing. You're going to have an IR drop between like your two peaks, your anodic and your cathodic. The other interesting thing has to do with the fact that this is again another one of those Dan Shearson fundamental electron transfer kind of things.
Now who's name dropping?
I'm just name dropping all the time. It's just like when you spend time in like the Russian school of electrochemistry, it's just like, oh gosh,
all the fundamentals,
all the fundamentals and all
Crazy.
that kind of stuff. And he's good. It's just
it's a lot.
it's hard. It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's just a lot.
I'm going to share my screen again. But if we go back to that, like that picture I have of just like donor acceptor states, sort of say. And I think people are still studying this, but if you have your, like, let's just call this the donor, and then you have I'll go in red, and we'll also go back, and then we'll have the acceptor. Acceptor, and then it's like, when there's overlap between these, we get electron transfer. So the shape of this, like the broadening of these shapes, these states, this all has to do with the solvent, the concentration of the solvent, the electrolyte. All those things broaden these states, because like this, for example, if we go back to, like, this might be like the donor might be something like Fe 2 plus, and the acceptor is something, well, let's use red again. Might be Fe 3 plus. Just two like iron atoms in solution, right? And it's the solution that actually, like, when you're in like a chemistry class, you're never taught you never get these kinds of donor acceptor things, because when you're taught about it,
Unless Dan Shearson's your teacher.
yeah, unless Dan Shearson's your teacher, in which case when you have to go to office hours, you'll find that like his office is in like the most obscure place. But when you're taught about this stuff, you're taught about things like these like homo-lumo diagrams, and you get stuff like this, right? And there's some number of like electrons here and stuff like that, right? This is what you're taught. This is for things like molecular and atomic orbitals. So molecular and atomic orbitals. And at the same time, like, you're taught about this and you have these discrete energy levels. And then, when you talk about like semiconductors and band theory, you like all this just turns into like this, right? All that turns into this. So one of these is like atomic, and it's like gas phase, right? If I have a gas phase iron, I get this picture. But if I have a lattice of iron, I get this picture, right? So this picture corresponds to the atoms inside a solution with concentrations of electrolyte and solvent and all this stuff. And that's why you get this picture, which creates these broadening effects where you have access to multiple electronic states when you're in the solution, the aqueous phase. So, so the concentration, the kind of electrolyte, like all those things, it plays a role in that kind of picture, which is probably a little bit more than what you were expecting, but like
It's a bit much.
It's a bit much. I'm on a Dan Shearson, like, oh, my view of electron transfer is totally different now.
It's a bit much. It's like it's a lot to digest, honestly. But the other part of your question,
Oh, yeah.
Kanav was saying yes, it can, and so
It can.
your next question was, can peaks shift? Yeah, basic.
peaks
Yes, they
shift,
can. So
yeah.
as Alex was describing, but in a way related directly to the CV peaks. I'll just share my screen.
Yeah.
So, for example, practically, you'll see something like this. Can you make sure I'm sharing right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
So, if you have high concentration, maybe you get something like that.
Mhm.
If you have low concentration, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
Right. So peaks can shift as you go from high to low, molarity or whatever of your electrolyte.
Mhm.
And that's the effect of basically IR, right? IR drop.
Yeah.
So when you do a potentiostat, for example, that can do IR compensation, you go from red to black here. Like the peaks you will find that corrective. So the peak, sometimes the peak height, I mean, in theory, these peak heights should be the same location here. Maybe they'll vary ever so slightly, but roughly speaking, you're looking at this peak shift, should be, let's say 60. It's never really 60, but if it's perfect, it should be about 60 millivolts. But when you have your messy low concentration electrolyte, maybe it's like 300.
Yeah.
Like that's terrible. It's
Yeah.
it's not reversible enough or whatever. It's like, well, sometimes that's just the electrolyte concentration is too low. So you can either increase the conductivity of your electrolyte or do IR compensation with your potentiostat. Something like that can help
Yes.
improve. So that's practically what you might expect to see from that phenomenon, I guess you would say. So that's a practical answer for you for peak shifting and concentrated electrolyte.
Yes.
Where are we
good.
here? Let's see.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm trying to get through. Kanav was talking about stuff. So it looks like there was a question here from Nduke.
Duque.
Um,
Again, sorry for mispronouncing your
apologies
name.
for the name mispronouncing here. But you were asking Chris. Chris is effectively our third chair here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Thanks, Chris.
yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, answering questions while we aren't, But I would like to know how to determine the number of exchanged electrons on a quasi-reversible system using only CV. So Chris's answer was actually a good one. Basically, I'm not sure if that can be inferred accurately using only CV. And the answer is that it can't be necessarily accurately inferred with CV. And one of the reasons for that is that cyclic voltammetry is not specific. I would say not specific enough. So one of the ways that people do infer or directly quantify the number of electrons transferred is to do kinetic studies, like using a rotating electrode or microelectrodes. Right? I've talked about this before in some of these weeks here, but when you do
and Tafel analysis,
it's my favorite thing. Yeah, the misuse of Tafel, analysis is like a trigger point for me.
Yeah.
So please ask me questions about Tafel analysis.
Mhm.
So to answer your question is that when you're doing cyclic voltammetry, okay, you are observing, just to piggyback on what you talked about just a few minutes ago, right? The difference between faradic and capacitive currents and processes of this kind of phenomenon. Those are contributions of processes that are fundamentally different, right? One is related to, faradic kinetic processes. One might be diffusional. One might be non-faradic. There's a lot of like embedded processes all occurring simultaneously. And cyclic voltammetry by itself on a stationary kind of electrode system is not differentiating between all of those. I've talked about this a few times. I'll sort of talk it through again really quickly here. But one of the ways I like to define a peak when you're doing a CV, right? Why do you get a peak? Well, you get a peak because this right here is, as quickly as I can go through it, this is Butler-Volmer response, right? Which is this Butler-Volmer response is kinetics, Kinetics. And then you have a decay in the current because of a Cottrell response. And that is, roughly speaking, diffusion limitations. Okay, so that's roughly why when you just do a regular CV, you get a peak. You have a mixture of kinetics and diffusion. And then there's also, why is this right here? Why does this exist? Well, that's double layer capacitance, why there's a bit of an offset of the current from one to the, from one scan to the next. There's a window, right? When you scan backwards or whatever, you have this gap that's double. So there's a lot of stuff going on. The extraction of the number of electrons transferred, N, is a kinetic parameter. That is a kinetic parameter. That's the number of electrons transferred is kinetics. So you have to do CV in a way that it is kinetics only, and that is almost never the case, which is why I get on my high horse about Tafel analysis. Doing Tafel analysis is a purely kinetic analysis, and people do it on data that is not purely kinetic, and so it is an improper application. However, one suggestion, if you will, is the Randall-Sevcik equation. So the last thing and I've made this suggestion before, and to be perfectly honest, I don't know if it's like the best way to do it, but if you look at the Randall-Sevcik equation, it's an expression that relates peak current of a cyclic voltammogram to a bunch of stuff. Usually what people are doing when they do this is that they're varying, I'll zoom in here. They're varying this here, the scan rate, this new variable here, with the peak current, and they get an estimate of the diffusion coefficient. And they're assuming one electron transfer or whatever it is. They assume N. Yeah. Now, if you, for example, do some CVs at whatever scan rate and you know the diffusion coefficient, or you assume it, or you look it up, or whatever, right? You could, in theory, solve for N because the rest of everything is known. You know the concentration of your electrolyte, your solvent, whatever. You know the surface area of your electrode. You know Faraday's constant. You know the ideal gas constant. You know the temperature. You can technically extract N. It's sort of out here. It's in here. But you could solve for N. This is in theory. I don't know exactly if this is like greatly accurate, admittedly. But you could, in theory, like change the scan rate, get a new peak current, and get a bunch of different estimates of N from this expression. It's a path forward. I don't know if it's like the best way to do it, but in pure CV, it could, in theory, give you an estimate to get that. But for the most part, pure CV doesn't give you, unless you're rotating or you have certain conditions, right? It doesn't give you pure kinetic information. It gives you a mix of information. And the number of electrons transferred is kinetic information. And so it is not the best idea to try to extract that if your signal isn't purely related to kinetics.
Yeah, and the fact that it's quasi-reversible makes it challenging, because I would say if you're able to get the N in a cyclic voltammetry experiment, normally we say that there's like a 59 millivolt peak separation between your anodic and your cathodic waves, and that's like per electron transfer. And ideally, if N was 2, then ideally they would be shifted like half of that. You'll have like 30 millivolts. But for a quasi-reversible reaction where your peak splitting is naturally a little bit higher, as well as quasi-reversible also somewhat of a loaded term.
Yeah,
it's important. Like, is it because the electron transfer is slow, or is it because there's a coupled chemical reaction? So
yeah,
that's another thing that's going to make figuring out N a little bit more complex.
Why is it?
Yeah, why is it quasi?
Yeah, some other parasitic, if you will, chemical like a PSET or an EC reaction or something might be making it quasi-reversible, and that doesn't mean the kinetics is poor. It means there's some other reaction.
Some other reaction happening.
This is a multivariate problem, but hopefully that's a decent overview while we get to some other questions. It does look like there's a lot. We're falling behind, which I appreciate everybody here. And apologies if you ask a question and you wait like 30 minutes to the good thing, and for us as far as like providing good amount of content here, but also the tricky thing for us is that it's hard to answer electrochemistry questions in like 8 seconds. It takes time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's right.
So it looks like this is the next. Did you have something?
I was actually going to ask what CCCC
CCCV, constant current, constant voltage. So
constant-
Fatima, if that is what you mean, I
Yeah.
don't know any other definition of that acronym. This is a battery terminology. So
Okay.
yes, I will quickly explain what a
Yeah.
constant current, constant voltage test is consists of. Let me
Mhm.
erase this stuff. So, oh, you know what's really cool? My computer's going to run out of battery because I didn't plug it in. Give me a
Oh yeah. And I'm gonna keep looking at
Let me plug
just
my
keep an
computer in
eye on
live
some
here
other
before
questions.
it dies midstream and then we lose the whole thing.
Yeah, and let's see, Fatma.
All right.
Oh, and then later, Fatma, we'll try to answer your other question about tips on research. And actually, no, it looks like we have.
Why does lithium plating occurring during
Yeah, why
fast
is it?
charging? Yeah, this must be about CCCV for
Yeah.
lithium.
Okay.
So yeah, so okay, so CCCV, sometimes it's written like you showed it, but sometimes it's like this. This is I'm going to use the text box because that's better than me writing. So this is constant current, constant, and this is important because it's not to be confused with CV, which means cyclic voltammetry. So with battery testing, it's a distinctly different process. So constant current, another name for that is chronopotentiometry in terms of analytical chemistry. And constant voltage is chronoamperometry. So these are equivalent terms. Constant current, chronopotentiometry, constant voltage, chronoamperometry. Constant current, constant voltage is effectively a kind of charge-discharge test that you will do on a battery. So what you will do is I'll put a double axis plot here to illustrate what I mean. This is current. Red is potential or voltage. Okay. So the constant current, constant voltage consists of, just like it sounds, you apply a constant current for some period of time. Let's say it's a charge. So this is your battery is going to increase in potential until it reaches a certain point. Let's say that's right here. That's the CC until this point. By the way, this is time or capacity. This is the CC step, constant current. I'm applying a constant current. This is some value. It could be charge, could be discharge, and the potential goes up here. The constant voltage step is just like it sounds. Once I reach 100% state of charge, my upper potential limit, upper voltage limit, I'm going to hold it there. This is supposed to be a flat line. My ability to draw is always suspect. I'm then going to hold. I'm drawing this longer for illustration purposes. Normally, this step is much shorter than I'm drawing. It will be like the actual amount of time you would hold comparatively would be like that or less compared to the amount of time the CC step took. This CV step is usually much shorter. You're going to hold that potential, and while holding the potential, the voltage, the current will then decay. And you're going to hold it until the current drops to a certain point. Okay. So the first step, the CC step, you're going to do until the voltage reaches this upper limit here, whatever that is. And then the CV step, you're going to do until the current goes below some limit, whatever that limit is. Okay. That is, in essence, the CCCV. Now, usually this is coupled with the reverse process. That this is the charge. So the discharge would be then applying the equivalent negative current, if you will, which causes the voltage to drop and discharge until the lower point. So that would be your CC. This would be like your discharge. Okay, so just writing shorthand, reminding this is the discharge, this is the charge, right? What you do not do is a CV step on the way down. So there is no CV step on the way down, only the way up. You would not then hold the voltage at the bottom. You only do that for charging. It's kind of like you could imagine if you're filling up your gas tank with gas or petrol, whatever, right? You're not supposed to do it anymore. Modern cars aren't. It's not a good thing, but people you'd fill it up and then it would stop and then you top it off. right? That's what the CV step is. It's a topping off. And there's some reasons for that. I'm going to keep it brief so I can get to other questions about why you do that, why you don't, whether it's even necessary. It isn't. That's okay. Don't worry about it. You still do it. A lot of people still do it. This is what it is. That's a hopefully quick overview of what that test is. I want to get to other questions. So I'll leave it there. If you need clarification, Fatima or anybody else, let me know. I can do more, but I'm going to leave it there for now.
Do you want to answer
the other one? Yeah,
Fatima's question about lithium plating?
Why does lithium plating occur during fast charging conditions? Yeah. So again, somewhat briefly here, trying to get to everything. It's already been an hour and a half, so I want to try to get to. I see there's some more questions below.
I know you've described this in the past about like putting things together quickly.
I have this little illustration I try to do. It doesn't really explain it from a scientific perspective, but I like it.
Yeah,
it's kind of a helpful illustration. So I'm not sure if I have a good technical answer. What I have is more of an illustration. So the illustration briefly that I give, I like to give for this is, why does charging fast, why is it worse than charging slowly? Okay, imagine I give you a pile of Legos or blocks, right, where you can build like a tower or a wall or whatever, right? And I give you a bunch of different shaped bricks and blocks, and I say, you have 10 hours to take these 100 bricks and make a wall. That's a long time. You're going to sit there and you're going to be like, no, this one should go here. Okay, well, and you're going to build at the end of the 10 hours, unless you're severely attention deficient, you're going to sit there and make the most perfect, like structure with no gaps, and it will be great. And then I tell you to take it apart and put all the pieces somewhere else. It's going to be great. Now, if I tell you have 82 seconds to do that same thing, go. You're gonna shove it together quickly. There's gonna be gaps. You're not gonna like get it to look perfectly smooth. You're gonna leave some things are gonna be all messy and kind of out of place. That's the sort of, what is that, analogy or a metaphor or a simile? I don't know. I'm not an English major. Whatever. Metaphor? I think it's a metaphor. That's how you can think about charging batteries quickly. So when you charge a battery really quickly, up and down, up and down, up and down, it's like you aren't giving it time to like fully and perfectly, if you will, like fill either the anode or the cathode with lithium, because charging and discharging is just one side is losing lithium and one side is gaining lithium. Depends on which process, which electrode is doing which. But when you do that slowly, you get like a very nice, perfect filling or emptying of lithium on one side. When you do it really, really fast, it is, the scientific reasons is probably things like it's a higher degree of polarization or capacitive effects that are, you might be getting a thick SEI. There might be some degradation of electrolyte. So probably some better, frankly, explanations.
So I have a question then. Like, when you charge a battery quickly compared to slowly, does it mean that you're applying like a lower voltage difference?
No, it means you're applying a higher current.
Okay,
so like modern phone chargers, for example.
Yeah.
Like if you've bought a new like smartphone in the last, at this point, a good while, probably 5 to 6 years, which, as you know, I get new phones every like 8,000 years because I'm an old person and I hate new technology, which is a whole different discussion for another day. But the fast charging cables now, you can charge your whole phone in like 40 minutes or like an hour. It's quick. It's pretty quick, right? Comparatively, before, you go back 15 years and we had to charge our phones overnight and it took 6-7 hours. That was how fast. So it's because the USB-C port can hit, it's like, was it 3 amps? Something like that.
Interesting. Okay.
It's higher. It's a higher. The structure of the USB-C, like the letter C, right? USB-C port is higher power. It's higher current throughput. Yeah. So like a USB onto a computer it can't do as many amps.
So So I guess the reason I ask this is
Mhm.
to drive a higher current, does that inherently mean that there's a bigger voltage difference? And hence the reason why lithium plating might be occurring is because you're now within the thermodynamic range. Like you're trying to get more, more lithium to separate or get, from one side to the next, to charge it.
That might be, it might be like a localized potential. So the voltage of the battery itself will change faster, but overall, like if you're going from 3 to 4 volts as you charge, right?
Yeah.
And you apply a milliamp, it's going to go like 3.0001, 3.0002. It's going to go slow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And okay, and now you apply a gigaamp,
Yeah.
but you're still going between 3 and 4. It's not any higher. It's still between 3 and 4. It's just getting there faster. It goes 3, 4, 5, 6. It just, you'll charge from 3 to 4 in like 10 seconds or 30 minutes or whatever. So it's faster, but that voltage of the battery itself is not any different. But what it might mean is that there might be a localized,
Interesting.
like a local, that
Yeah,
might be an explanation for the plating, because like a higher voltage will drive a plating process or something like that. So as you're,
Like I'm thinking about a galvanostatic.
yeah, you're
experiment,
driving a
basically.
really high amount of current. So like maybe like locally there's a really high voltage that's not related to the battery itself in whole, but like over here there's some localized voltage because of the high driving forces.
Yeah.
That might be the case.
Maybe.
That might
Okay.
scientifically explain. That's a good
Just a
possibility.
thought.
And honestly, part of the fast charging, the hard part about it, the tricky and the danger of it is that you get plating, you can get dendrites,
Yeah.
because of the sort of higher amount of entropy, I would say, in the scientific way, associated with the lithium intercalation or deintercalation, as it might be. The lithium will tend to, like, it's like they're building the wall with 10 seconds to go. You're just going to start putting them on top of each other. It's like, even physically, you could think about it this way. Like, what is a dendrite? What is a lithium plating? Like, that's when lithium makes a spike almost and goes, like, you have anode and you have cathode and you have your membrane in between. Well, if lithium spikes through the membrane, it shorts the battery and then your battery's dead or it blows up. Seriously, right? So you don't want your lithium, you want it to like plate evenly in the lattice of your anode or your cathode, not out. But if it's so fast, you get that effect. It plates out,
Yeah.
because it expands whatever direction it might. So or you simply lose, like, you lose capacity because your anode consists of graphite, and it's like the graphite becomes structurally different if you charge really fast over and over again. This is partly why we get new phones every year. Most people do. I don't, but most people do, because they make the batteries charge so fast. But you're going to get a new phone before your battery starts kind of
Like really
pooping
going
out
dead,
on you. Yeah, exactly. Right. Because you want the new technology, but in reality, charging your phone really, really fast is really detrimental to its long-term health.
Yeah.
So I actually have a slower charger that I use at night for my phone because I don't ever want to get a new phone. So I charge it pretty slowly because I don't have any particular need that I need my phone to be charged up within 40 minutes. So I hope that answers that question. That's, I have a hard time, admittedly, explaining the science. I think the localized high voltage might be a good answer for why you get the plating, but that answer is the best one I like to give for like a, I don't know, what do you want to call it, teaching sort of idea about like thinking through why fast is worse than slow for like reproducibility or what have you, something like that.
Yeah.
Bob Owl has a question next. Is that right?
Yeah, Bob Owl. And then I know Fatma does have questions about presenting research during an interview. This may be something that we do maybe a little bit later, just so we can get to some of the technical questions.
Yeah,
so
that's fair enough.
Fatma, if you're willing to wait, or
yeah, we'll try to get to that after. Do you want to tackle this one here?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about this.
Oh, it's a Tafel question.
It's a Tafel.
It's definitely not me.
Yeah. No, so it just sounds like this. So in OER activation, overpotential is determined by Tafel fitting without the presence of bubbles. I'm wondering how it is measured and how I can set the range for Tafel properly. So we talk a little bit about this. Some people do cyclic voltammetry at very, very slow scan rates. We tend to recommend using a rotating disc for getting the kinetic current. I know Neil has a whole webinar on this, and if you're a tier 2 member, you can watch his rotating disk and Tafel analysis webinar, which is like a full like hour, 2-part series on this. But briefly speaking, and hopefully I can get this kind of right. So let me actually delete all this stuff. Hopefully get rid of this stuff too. Here we go. But in a Tafel plot, using Tafel analysis, generally speaking, let me make sure I'm in black. Here we go. So in Tafel analysis, if we just I'm just going to look at the first quadrant, but basically you're going to actually maybe I have the whole four quadrants here. So you're going to have I think this is the y-axis, and depending if you're in corrosion or if you're doing just like regular electroanalytical chemistry, they may switch the x and y-axis. But you have the log of the current, and this tends to be something like kinetic current. So you're going to have you're going to have decades. You're going to have like 10 and then 100 and then 1,000 and stuff like that for absolute current. But it's the log of the current on the y-axis, and then you're going to have the overpotential, which is eta, in things like volts or millivolts. So this is typically in millivolts, and it's like 100 or 200 or something like that. And then your Tafel analysis tends to look a little bit like it kind of curves, but then it goes very straight in both directions for like positive and negative potential. And this is maybe I should put this as like absolute, because so it's positive, right? The current's in the same direction. So you're trying to get something like this, where you have this is your Tafel plot, and then when you get the Tafel slope, and you can also get the intercept. So when you switch to I'm just gonna have kind of like a dotted line, because you're gonna have a fit, right? This area here is actually curved, but when you do it, you're actually going to have more of like a fit,
like a tangent,
tangential fit to it. So that's like this area blown up. So this is the kind of plot that you want. And when I think about this, if I were just to think kind of conceptually about a cyclic voltammetry experiment, your zero in overpotential is really the redox potential of your cyclic voltammetry experiment, right? Like this is where, like, at your E naught, if this is E naught for your reaction, like that's here. So you can kind of think of this conceptually, like, okay, any more positive, I have a certain species in solution and a current associated with it, and then any negative, I have like the other side. So that's one way you can start to think about it. But you rarely use cyclic voltammetry for generating. Well, you have to do a bunch of stuff, very specific conditions for cyclic voltammetry to work well, because the current response that you're measuring contains capacitive current. It contains some Faradic current. It's kind of not mass transport limited, it is mass transport limited, right? The current here is getting like smaller as the potential goes higher. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that is why when making these Tafel plots, you tend to use something like a rotating disc electrode to do it. And the reason why, if I can, why is my lasso tool not working for capturing? There we go.
There it is. Because
So
you're not lassoing enough.
I'm not lassoing enough of that. And so the idea, the technique, and let me know if he's actually like if he's saying any comments or if something's not clear.
I think you're good.
But generally speaking, you use when you do a rotating disc experiment and you get these kinds of S-shaped voltammograms. This is not the best S-shaped voltammogram, but you have voltage, you have current, you have your kind of mass transport limiting current here, and this is at one rotation rate. Maybe this is 1600 RPM. RPM. Okay, So here, the current, it's steady state, it's mass transport limited. Here, your voltage is sufficiently low that no electron transfer process is happening. And so people typically get kinetic information in this kind of in-between region where they're able to look at kind of this in-between where the voltage isn't sufficiently high enough that you have like all the current. Let's say the best way to describe this is um, this in this voltammogram, you're rotating at 1600 RPM. So you've got lots of molecules flowing towards the electrode surface. Mass transport isn't really an issue at this point. But as you start to sweep, your voltage in this region is not sufficiently positive to induce the oxidation completely. So you're limited. And one thing to keep in mind is that if I hold the potential here, I'm only going to get this current, right? This value is a steady state response, which is very important to know. You really know the values in this kind of in between mass transport limitation and kinetic limitation. So what people will do is they'll take data at different voltages along these plots, and they can do this at different rotation rates as well. And then they'll plot the let's see if I make sure I get this right. As you know, it's like they're measuring the current on the y-axis, and then they're looking at I think that's the square root of the rotation rate, or 1 minus rotation rate raised to the minus 1/2. And they get these plots that look kind of like this. And this is at each voltage. So if this was like voltage 1, this would be like voltage 1. And it's the current as a function of rotation rate. So they take a bunch of these rotation rate values, and then they plot it versus the rotation rate of a rotating disk electrode raised to the minus 1/2 power. And the reason why they do this is they're trying to get this intercept. This intercept here represents what we call like kind of the kinetic current, because when the rotation rate is infinitely fast, this is, when omega becomes really, really large, then you're at the point of kind of infinite mass transport, and the current is associated with a purely kinetic thing, kinetic operations. So these current values make up the values that are used in getting this kind of Tafel analysis. And these voltages are likewise equal to some of the overpotential. And that's how people get, and they're looking at the log of the current as well when they're applying these Tafel analyses. So I know that's a very quick kind of explanation of how you can come up with the Tafel analysis. Again, Neil has like a full webinar describing the process. He actually does an example with like ruthenium hexamine, where he does a Tafel analysis, and you can use it to look at things like overpotential for your OER reaction. So Bob, hopefully that was helpful.
There was a next question. I'm sorry, I was listening to you, but I don't really care about what you're talking about. No, I was kidding.
Yeah, that's all good. I was moving forward.
I was reminding myself. So okay, so there was a question. I just wanted to have a answer ready. It's one of these things like, like we know it, but like I always have to remind myself exactly where the math comes from. So that's what I was preparing. Mm-hmm. OER.
So everything I said was correct somehow.
Correct. Yeah.
Because Neil didn't say anything about it.
That's correct. It was all correct.
It was all correct.
I was deeply paying attention.
Anyway, go ahead.
Fernando. Yeah, no, I was looking at try to get. Fernando. First of all, Fernando was talking about some of the 3,000 cycles for his ADT. You've got a 10-10-80 percentage of your like platinum to your perovskite to carbon. That's a pretty high amount of carbon and a high amount of platinum. And so Chris was actually probably answered for us, but just saying, the ECSA increases and then decreases over time. Basically, Chris was saying, get some periodic CVs and do like a 3D graph to see how it changes over time. So Fernando said, yeah, I haven't thought about doing that. Get every 1,000 cycles run a CV. So I think that we've put a pin in that. Hopefully you've got a decent understanding of that. I wanted to touch this because this was just something I was like, I saw it and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to try to explain this if I can.
Yeah.
Guard of Viewer says, why does the peak to peak potential approach 59 is the number when the scan rate is slowed for cyclic voltammogram? Well, first of all, you're talking about quasi-reversible. That is a situation, in theory, if it is perfectly reversible, 1 electron, 59 millivolts will occur regardless of the scan rate, right? Now with a quasi-reversible, as you increase the scan rate, because of the things we've talked about sort of already in this today, I think we talked about, uncompensated resistance or another PSAT or a chemical step might cause stuff to occur.
As electron transfers slow.
As you slow down the scan rate, you're giving more time for everything to relax. I'm trying to relate it to the quasi-reversibility, but you're getting closer to an idealized kind of a situation by reducing by increasing the time for capacitive processes or perhaps confounding steps to settle out and not impact quite so much. But what I wanted to talk about was where the 59 comes from. Why is that number? Just it's sort of a refresher for myself too, thankfully. And hopefully you'll bear with me here. So that comes from the Nernst equation, actually. So the Nernst equation is E is equal to E0. I know it's like I shouldn't have to look this up, but I do. E0 plus RT over NF. Where is it? Yeah. Plus RT over NF. And then it's the natural log of, we'll just call it Q. It's the, the quotient.
Yeah. Yeah.
So actually that just comes from this. It's RT over NF. Okay. So, and then what we do is we like to do log of base 10 instead of natural log. So sometimes what you'll see for the Nernst equation is something like E is equal to E0, or sometimes the zero's up here. It's the same thing. Plus 2.3, something like that, right? Yeah. RT over NF, because that's just, and then log of base 10, because we just like to use that. This is where Tafel sometimes, not Tafel, but decades of current, decades of whatever, we like to use log base 10 instead of natural log. Yeah. So that's just because when you convert from natural log to log base 10, you end up with this, it's 1 over the natural log of 10. And so it's 2.3. That's where that number comes from. So 59 is actually, it's just this. 2.3 times 8.314 times 298 Kelvin over 1 electron over 96485.3 is 59 millivolts. This number is 59 millivolts. So just mathematically, sometimes I think it's helpful to see that or whatever. That's where this number comes from. That's what it is. It's about 60. So that's like the perfect, the ideal Nernstian, whatever, reversible 1 electron process gives you about 60 millivolts of peak of separation. That's where the number comes from. I just thought it was helpful to kind of show that one more time. That's kind of a cool thing to remember, I suppose. Yeah. There's a question about a wave driver 40 next.
Yeah.
What do we got?
So I have problems with the wave driver 40. OCP between 2 reference electrodes is very unstable. Aftermath says the current can reach 3 microamps with another potentiostat that's stable. Is the potentiostat broken? So, so for clarification and just to kind of tell everybody what's happening, at least what I think is happening from Alexander Baranov's, is he has 2 reference electrodes connected in the same solution, and they are connected with a with just in a 2 electrode configuration. So you have a working electrode, the kind of orange, red working sense, working drive connected to 1 reference electrode. And then you have the counter and reference electrode shorted together, connected to the other one. And ideally, both of these reference electrodes are exactly the same. And ideally, there should be maybe like a very small to 0 voltage difference between two reference electrodes that are the same voltage, assuming that the electrolyte is the same. So if I'm getting the clarification correct, it says the current can reach 3 microamps, which means there's a 3 microamp difference between the two reference electrodes.
Well,
Now,
that also just doesn't. I mean, fundamentally doesn't seem to make sense. So one option is that the potentiostat is faulty, which we don't want to talk too much more about this because this is like I appreciate you bringing the question here, but we should handle this offline. You should email us off of this live stream. Like we can troubleshoot this with you.
Yeah.
So that ultimately, if you're having a problem with your equipment, please email us and we'll try to handle it that way. But yeah, I just wanted to say that if you're getting 3 microamps, you're not running an OCP experiment.
Yeah, that's right.
If the potentiostat's in OCP mode, it's impossible to have any current. The current is 0.
Yeah.
So we would need to see your data in some photographs because there's 2 options essentially, and then I'll drop this and move on because I don't want to bore everybody perhaps with like one particular troubleshooting thing. Although we want to help you obviously, but I just don't want to make everybody sit here while we maybe talk about equipment issues, right? But one of 2 things is happening. One is that the equipment is truly like malfunctioning and applying current when it shouldn't be or something like that. And the other is that you may just have something not connected properly, or that you're not running the correct experiment with the software and something like that. So this could be just a sort of technical problem choosing the right experiment. So something of that nature.
You should be measuring millivolts.
Not amps.
and not micro or milli.
Please email us or contact us from our website. And give us the data so we can see what's happening. Because we can try to help you troubleshoot this for sure. But
but also some of these issues actually can just be from reference electrode potentials can be very, very subtle. And if you've run an experiment, because again, Neil just talked about the Nernst equation. If you think about the Nernst equation and that a 10-fold difference between, say, the oxidized and reduced concentration species represents 59 millivolts. Well, a small change, right? So 10, right? That's the difference between 1 molar and 0.1 molar. And then all of a sudden, if I change the concentration of one of my reference electrodes by a little bit, that's going to show up in the millivolt difference. You're going to see that. And if there's a subtle change in concentration just from one experiment to the next, you could run into an issue where you're not seeing exactly the same. So again, we do need to figure out what it is offline, but we need to understand a little bit more about is it stable? Are the reference electrodes stable? But from one experiment to the next is another thing. But that's also just a useful thing for people in general. If you're testing reference electrodes, run them in an open circuit potential, measure the voltage difference between them. It should be theoretically 0, but they're almost never exactly 0. They'll be maybe 1 or 2 millivolts off, maybe 5 at the most. But yeah, that's also a useful thing because reference electrodes cause a bajillion different types of problems. So
yeah, all the problems in the world are caused by reference electrodes. That's just a fact.
Yes. Okay, so Congo says, thanks for the free session. One quick question. What are the main differences between a BTS, battery cycler, and a potentiostat? Greetings from Spain. Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. I think it's getting pretty late for where you are. Although Spain is one of those countries where you don't start eating dinner until 11 p.m.
Yeah, that's right.
I've been to Spain. It's really beautiful. But it was hard to get used to it's 9 p.m. Maybe restaurants are starting to open now. Yeah, but I was hungry 3 hours ago.
Yeah,
because I'm an American and we don't eat that late.
Yeah.
Although I don't know, maybe some people do, but no, I don't. I'm a boring regular person. I eat early and then go to bed early because I'm like that. But
not a bad thing.
It takes getting used to. I'm telling you, it's a culture shock because everything is shifted later. The whole lifestyle is just totally different. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent.
No, good.
So honestly, there isn't a difference in some sense between a battery cycler and a battery cycler is a multi-channel potentiostat.
Mhm.
The capabilities of each of those based on the wording will likely be different. So a potentiostat, if you're buying a potentiostat from a company,
Yeah.
it will probably be more capable than a battery cycler is per channel, most likely. Like a potentiostat might have like a greater voltage and current range and sensitivity and more filtering options and more better impedance frequency capabilities, like probably, right? A lot
Yeah.
of potentials, I mean, it varies obviously, but
Yeah.
most potentiostats can do more, whereas a battery tester will obviously vary as well, but it's like multiple channels of potentiostatic capability, which means that it can, generally speaking, do constant voltage or constant current, or do both of those things. It may or may not be able to do impedance. It depends. And it probably has a more limited range of voltages and currents it can apply or do. And a lot of times that's to save space, because a battery tester has 8, 16, 24,
Yeah.
32, 64 channels. And so it's like, you have like a bunch of cards plugged into a unit,
Yeah.
whatever. So you don't, and when you're doing battery cycling, you don't often need the same level of sensitivity as you
Yeah.
would on like an electroanalytical test. Like you don't need to measure down to like picoamp or something, you just
Mhm.
need like more of a rough, not as fast, long term, you're talking about like longer term cycling rather than like a test that takes 10 minutes. You're talking about like 10 days,
Mhm.
right? So the specifications are going to be a little different. But strictly speaking, there is no difference. A battery cycler is just a collection of potentiostats with slightly different specs.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Just want to have a shout out to Dodor Tempesta. He was able to pass his university analytical electrochemistry exams, particularly the impedance part, thanks to our tutorials. So we're super happy that you passed your exams and that we were helpful. So
Later on, I'll give you
big
my
shout
financial information. So I expect a 10%
out.
royalty payment from your first paycheck, but you're welcome.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome.
No, I'm kidding, of course. But we appreciate you joining us or looking at our content, and we're happy to be of help. This is the kind of thing that, brings it warms the
community,
cockles
yeah.
of my soul.
Yeah, yeah.
I was trying to find the right words.
Cockles
The
of your
cockles
soul.
of my soul. Is that okay to say?
Yeah,
Being silly here, but
that's fine.
no, this is what we're doing. We want everybody to understand this stuff better. And I
Yeah.
wish someone was explaining some of these things when I was in graduate school.
Yeah.
So
I think we're almost out of time. There's one quick question here from Haman, which is, can we use a silver chloride reference electrode in alkaline electrolyte? No, absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. Most silver chloride reference electrodes are constructed out of glass and have a frit. Most of the time, that's made out of porous glass, sometimes ceramic, most of the time. But glass is not very compatible in alkaline media, like strong potassium hydroxide 1 molar or even 0.1 molar potassium hydroxide. And really, the alkaline solutions will etch away at glass. And what commonly happens is you'll use a silver chloride reference electrode in alkaline media, and maybe you get some decent data for the first 5 tries, but then on the 6th try or something like that, it stops working because it's etched away at the frit, and it has and as a result it blocks the frit, and then it ends up causing problems to your working electrode because of the feedback of the potentiostat. So it's a bad idea to use a silver chloride reference electrode in alkali media.
I want to clarify that really quickly.
Yeah.
What you said is true, but if you are using dilute alkaline, it will be fine.
Okay, yes, it needs to be dilute.
So if you're routinely testing either high temperature and or high concentration, like I don't know, it's hard to pick a number, 1 molar, 2 molar, 5 molar or higher or something like that. I agree, you should avoid that, and mainly because it's because of the frit thing.
Yeah.
Right. Any sort of dissolution, aggregation, something that could block the frit is going to mess with you badly. It's probably better to avoid glass if you can. But I personally tend to find and have found personally when I when I was in graduate school, I did alkaline electrochemistry, and I used glass reference. I did not use concentrated alkaline. I used pretty weak alkaline for most of the time. So keep that in mind, right? I did not do strong KOH, in which case I probably would have had to modify as you suggested. But I did weak base, and I used glass like calomel electrodes, and it would work perfectly fine. So this isn't like a refuting what you just said, because it is generally speaking a good idea to avoid glass when you're doing alkaline. But low concentration alkaline, that problem is grossly overstated, in my opinion.
I want to make a. I'm gonna make a clarification. I'm not Mexican.
Is Alex
But thank you though.
Mexican?
I'm American. I'm from New Jersey. So just a point of clarification. I've been asked if I'm Russian, and
Yeah, you're asked Russian. Like one of the first ones we did, someone said, "Are you Russian?"
Are you Russian? Well, that's because my last name is Perov.
Oh, I guess is that a Russian?
Russian, yeah, it's from perovskite.
Oh,
Way
right.
back in the day. So
That's
so
funny.
yeah, I'm not Mexican.
Mexican.
But I think there are a couple questions. I think maybe we wrap up now. Also just saying, I think that one guy, Osama, send us an email, and then hopefully next week we'll be able to get to some questions.
And actually, I can answer this quickly, but
Yeah.
the answer is that okay. So you did provide some specifics for your data. Yeah, it would be better to do that through email. I'll send you an email, Osama, to try to explain the data, I guess. But again, it's always with this case, like I'm fitting what it looks like, because I am not running the experiments, right?
Yeah.
Like you're running the experiments, and you did provide some explanation, but I only know so much about the specifics about like what chemically is happening. So the fits that I provided for you, for example, were based on what the EIS data looks like, pretty basically, I would say.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I'll send you an email follow up to try and clarify some of that. But in the interest of time, I will try to keep this brief, I guess. Are we going to wrap it up? There might be still a few, but I guess I know we're sort of 2 hours is about our cap here. So yeah, sorry if we maybe haven't gotten to everything here, but I think we've mostly got to these questions.
Yeah, I think, and if we didn't get to your question, probably within the next few days. So first off, we always, after this, we usually put timestamps in the description for this video once it's up on YouTube. We usually put a reminder email for the following week. You can type your questions there ahead of time. This actually gives Neil and I a little bit more time to like take a deep dive through it. So this is a way you can like kind of give us questions if we don't get to them during this session because you asked it towards the end of the 2 hours. But we can usually get to them first thing on the next session. So just something to keep in mind.
Let me just address this one really quick. This seems like a relatively quick answer.
Oh yeah.
Is it true that millimolar concentration gives milliamps and molar gives no, not at all. The current you get is a function of the concentration of your stuff, but it is more a function of the surface area of your electrode.
Oh, they're proportional.
Yeah.
So like if you look at things like the Randall-Sebzich or the Cottrell equation or something, it's like it's directly proportional to concentration, and it's also directly proportional to the area.
Right. So there's a relationship, of course, but it is not safe to assume millimolar gives milliamp.
Yeah.
Like that those specific orders of magnitude for concentration and current should not be assumed, because it will depend on how big your electrode is.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. So yes, proportionality, but no to those specific whatever magnitudes of each, I guess.
Yeah, and also even the scan rate will give you some changes in the current as well.
Yeah, of course.
So there's all kinds of stuff like that.
So
yeah. Okay.
All right, my Mexican colleague. I think are we good?
Yeah. Hola. Yes.
Sí. Yeah.
All right. Well, have a good one, everybody. Enjoy your weekend, and thank you for stopping by. And we will see you next week.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye.